Good morning, friends. Welcome back to GM Philosophy in the Morning. I'm the GM Philosopher. Today we are talking about Session 0, and earlier in the week I published this on my Discord and my YouTube communities. I said, hey, I'm filming a video about how to run a great Session 0, and I'd love your help. Can you tell me what you do at your table to run a Session 0, make it awesome? Hopefully I can gather some awesome additional insight for the video. And guess what? The community did not disappoint. Many awesome game masters shared their advice, and in this video I'm going to show you all of the advice they submitted, both from my Discord and my YouTube communities. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Medlin said, take copious notes at what the players like and want. This is very good advice. Ask the players what they like and listen. This is actually a great first step piece of advice. Saka said, maybe obvious, but I'll say it. Set expectations. Is it a low magic campaign, high magic, grimdark, or heroic fantasy? What are you role playing? What is the world like? This is great stuff to talk about. Getting the players kind of familiar with the world state you want to run is really crucial, and making sure you're all on the same page is important. Jordan W. Creed said, I always ask what movies, TV shows, books, or other media arcs or stories, characters they love or like. Great advice. Garrick says, sorry, we'd played together occasionally for decades before this campaign, so we didn't have a Session 0. Sometimes it'd be that way. Sometimes you've been gaming with people for a long time and you all kind of already know the deal. Doesn't mean you can't update it, but there's merit here to what Garrick is saying. It's not 100% of the time necessary to have an in-depth Session 0. Mint Coded said, it's all about pre-planning. One-on-one with the players, set their expectations and wants from the game, and try to splash in a little bit of the thing that you believe they want to see flares of. If everyone wants to see a big dragon, TM, let it absolutely surprise wreck the starting town after you get to meet all the quirky and cool NPCs. It doesn't have to be a deception so much as incorporating ideas that lean into what they see. So this is like great piece of advice, because it's basically saying, hey, take the stuff that your players have told you they want to see and just run, like, bring it in first scene. Love this. But the basic essence of it is incorporate the stuff that your players want to see in the game. So great advice to Mint Coded. And Session 0 is a great time to gather that stuff. Bruce D said this, I am straightforward about the game, the rules set being used, and what I will try to bring to the game. I generally do not want any kind of backstory, but the player should have a general concept of their characters. This is actually interesting but not unheard of. Bruce D is maybe in the minority as far as GMs who, like, whether they desire backstory or not. Bruce D saying they don't desire backstory is interesting, but I can see a reason for why, because, and we go on to the second piece of the comment, give the players the opening to the game world and the character's place within that world. Now let's begin. So it's sort of a blank slate starting point. So that's an interesting take on it. And so that would be reflected in Session 0. Medlin gave another piece of advice here. Also, I would like to know what players' limits are, how graphic they like things, and any topics they prefer to steer clear of. That's a super good thing to cover. Not everyone wants to do or see or role play through all types of things, especially violent stuff, whatever. Vintox actually gave us a lot of advice here. Let's go through this. Establish the ground rules and etiquette. When we play, how long and where? How late is too late? How long might it extend past that? How to handle absences or abrupt interruptions? Minimum player count to move forward or segue or call the game? How long is the game commitment for? When does it end? Player do's and don'ts and what the consequences are. Do a round table of what brings each person to the table and what's fun for them and what isn't. The GM is a player too and should participate in this. I agree. The GM deserves to have fun too. They're not here just to be a servant for these players. They should be enjoying it. Talk about the system and system books available and discuss if that is subject to change or debate. Are you going to allow Dragon Magazine feats or nah? Important thing to discuss. How is the game adjudicated? With some examples so that players can get a feel for your flow and style at the game table. It's also useful to clarify what you may need from the players to collaborate and press forward with a challenge or scene. Other topics could include tropes and touchstones to drive home the attitude tone expected at the table, the limits of what will be played and won't be played, vetting content, how stakes and tension are to be handled, high simulation, meta rules and preferences, house rules, shared narrative storytelling and world building, how to facilitate feedback, adjustments, and retcons, impartial judgment or favoritism, open roles, fudging, bookkeeping, lethality, party allegiances and cooperation, pacing and separation, death and TPKs and how you will handle them, wealth and experience, and scope and world impact. Okay, so Vintox covered a lot of really important, like, functional stuff, especially how to handle player absences, how to know when the session is going to be canceled versus continue, how to handle interruptions, minimum player count to move forward. And then there's like a whole list of things like lethality is actually a good thing to discuss, because some players do not like super lethal games. Other players get bored by games with too low lethality, right? So these are all super good things to talk about. Vintox basically gives a whole checklist to work from. Now we're going to move on here to talk about John Haney's advice. John Haney is the lead moderator, lead counselor in our GM Philosophy Discord. However, I would like to invite you to join us. Link is in the description. The GM Philosophy Discord is free. We're talking about this kind of stuff all the time, and it's a great place to jump in, share some community with other awesome game masters who want to basically run better games. That's our whole mission here at GM Philosophy. So make sure to join us so that you can get in on these kind of conversations. With that being said, John said this: I tell them any homebrew or optional rules I'm using. I tell them clearly what level the world is so they don't expect to get to level 20. Brutal. You're just not going to get there, bro. I set expectations of how deadly the game will be. I tell them I pretty much never run the monsters as published, so don't bother even having a monster manual at the table. So that's actually really interesting. Some players do get really upset if monsters don't function exactly like it's said in the monster manual. I'm with John about this. I almost never run monsters exactly like they're on the manual. I'm always adjusting their abilities, maybe giving them new abilities, like reformulating their stats. I almost never run a stock monster. So I totally agree with John about this. And talking about it at session 0 could save you some drama. I have firsthand witnessed this. It can save you some drama. I lay very clear ground rules about what I will allow or not allow at the table as far as language, adult themes, violence, etc. I'm pretty sure I'm forgetting some things, but everyone else has filled in some good thoughts too. Great stuff, John, as usual. Doug Dingle had this to say: theme. Making sure everyone knows the theme covers the majority of other issues, in my opinion. Is it a goofy or light game, or is it grim, dark, serious? So much unfolds from theme, expectations, role play, how often death will happen, and topics that could come up along the way. Doug, I completely agree. And this is one thing that's really important to me at session 0. I talk about the theme. I like playing grim, dark games, to be honest. And I use contrasting wholesomeness in those games, but for the most part, my games contain a lot of dark themes, a lot of like dark situations, a lot of violence, and obviously I have limits of where I will go with it, and I express those very plainly in session 0. There are things I do not want in the games, like as far as like a certain level of violence towards certain types of characters or whatever. So talking about these things is important, and I think Doug's right. Talking about theme is a good catch-all and umbrella for many other issues. Next, we're going to move on to Bleeding Moons, who had a couple of good things to say. I ask if there's something a player does not want. Found out I do to a huge fear of spiders I didn't know before. That's actually interesting. I've never encountered anything like that, but that's a good thing to talk about at session 0. Does someone have a phobia? Maybe that's actually legit something to talk about. Bleeding Moons also said, I have done a few things like write down 2 truths and 1 lie about your player. I would make it so others find out these rumors and do not know what the truth is. It's actually funny. Another one I had each player write a life goal for their character and give it to me that no one else knew. Maybe one wanted to find a wife and live a happy life. Another one wanted as much money as possible. Another wanted to rebuild his family honor. Another one wanted to rule. It makes it so you can build different ways they can work towards their goals, and no one knows what the other's goals are. Monster of the week. So that sounds like a thing, like having a monster of the week and asking players about it is what it sounds like. I bought a map where I made roads and each player rolled the dice. Even was a rumor of the town or a person, statue, etc. in the town. Odds was to pull a card that put a building down like a school in the grid size. In the end, the players picked where they lived. It was a game where they were all 12-year-olds in the early 90s. Made it so they were more attached to the town. So basically, and I think that what Bleeding Moons is saying is it was a game where they were all 12-year-olds, and then they played this game in the early 90s. I don't think the game was set in the early 90s. But anyway, I don't know. But that's just what I got from the post. Okay, so Bleeding Moons actually touched on something here that could be really fun, which is co-creating the world with your players in session 0. I have actually done this before. This isn't what I usually do, because I usually run in my own world state that I create, and then I want the players to like discover it as they go. But I have had games where I've created the world with the players at session zero. And to be honest, there is a lot of interesting, like, good that comes from that. Players tend to get more invested in a world they helped to create. So that's actually really great advice, and I loved it. Thank you, Bleeding Moons. Now, all of this advice came from our Discord community, but I also got some great advice from the YouTube community. Several people chimed in with really in-depth comments. We're going to go over those next. Before we do, I just want to remind you that I have a free ebook available. Link is in the description. It's my 10-minute GM Mastery Toolkit. Basically, 20 years of running games condensed into a 10-minute read, 10 most in-depth, most important tips to help you level up your next game session. This is a book I made to help further the goals of this channel, which is to empower game masters to run better games. So grab that. It's free. Link is in the description. Take your next game session up a couple levels. Make it even more awesome than ever with this time-honed wisdom contained in the ebook. All right. Now let's talk about what we learned on the YouTube community thread. So here's what Andrew Weichelberry174 said. I hope I'm saying your name right. It's probably wrong. I think it is always a good idea to go over the tone of the campaign. It sometimes seems obvious to you when planning, but I remember running a Mutants and Masterminds campaign for a group that had previously only played D&D, and something as simple as killing your opponents carries a different connotation when you are playing superheroes. So this is really interesting. Classic Marvel was the same way. Like, basically in Classic Marvel, you would undergo serious penalties if you actually killed. Like, if you fight the supervillain, you're not supposed to kill them. You're supposed to apprehend them, right? So it's like really interesting. But I totally see where you're coming from with that. Every campaign, even ones within the same system with the same DM, have a different tone. And the biggest mistakes I've ever made in a session zero stem from failing to establish or discuss the tone. Super great advice there, and I completely agree with you. Tone is a really important thing to discuss. Now, Roll-Wise had a few good things to say here. Hello, this is always an interesting question. Session zeros can be very different if you know or don't know folks. However, if I was going to lock in on one piece of advice, it would be to nail down that schedule. What is your cadence? Every 2 weeks? Get it on the calendar. In my 3 games, the one with the loosest schedule is the one that seems to have the hardest time getting together consistently. This is right. As they say, scheduling is the true BBEG. Am I right? Also, to add to that, make sure you have expectations for player absences. Cardboard cutout, put in the bag of holding, other player takes over, etc. For our group, we just put them in the background, and if 2 or more folks can make it, we usually try to slip in a one-shot of a different game. Good luck. Can't wait to see the other advice. Roll-Wise is touching on something here that I think a lot of GMs don't think about in session zero, which is how do we handle absences. Personally, in my games, I like to try to include some kind of mechanism to handle it. For example, I have had situations where players will like magically zap out, if they're not there. Some players actually don't like the GM running their character when they're not there. And obviously having another player run your character, that would involve a lot of trust. It doesn't work with every group for sure. So I totally see what Roll-Wise is saying here. Talking about this is important. Now, Penima 4773 had this to say: I really like to establish expectations. What do the players want with the campaign? Combat heavy, RPG heavy? What do I expect of the players? I also find it important to run over do not include. So some people have personal trauma and don't want scenes of torture, graphic details on kills, etc. Basically establish expectations and boundaries. This is very important. This is true. But another thing that Panyema said here that I think is actually really good that isn't talked about enough at session zero is what does the GM expect from the players? A lot of times GMs will try so much to be a good GM. They'll ask the players, what do you want? What do you want? But then the GM never says to the players, here's what I expect from you. And personally, I believe this is a really important thing for a GM to do, because the GM, in doing all this work, deserves to run a game that people are going to buy into and be invested in for what it is. And the GM has a great deal of say in that. So I think that talking about that is important. So great thoughts there. Awesome. Now that concludes the advice we got in the community, but I would love to hear what you think. Drop a comment. Let me know how you run your session zero. Let me know if there's anything we left out. Let's make this video in the comments section below it the best compendium for session zero advice on the interwebs. And that's going to be a wrap for this one. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of GM Philosophy in the Morning. Empowering game masters to run better games is our mission here. If that jives with you, smash that subscribe button and that like button. And I'll see you awesome people on the next one.